Welcome to the Everything Financial Radio Show. You are listening to the Legacy Radio Network. I'm your host, Dennis Tubbergen, and we are here every week at this time, and we're glad you're joining us today. We have a terrific show lined up for you today. We've got Mr. Jim Babka, who is president of an organization called DownsizeDC.org. Jim's been on the show before. This organization has some radical ideas. One such radical idea: congressmen should be required to read the bills they vote on before they vote on them. We're going to ask Mr. Babka if that happened with Obamacare today. The bill that became Obamacare was delivered to congressmen at 11 o'clock at night, and the vote happened the next day at noon. So even a speed reader could not have possibly read what was in this bill. So we're going to get Jim's comment on this. And we also are going to talk about a rather controversial proposal put forth by Mr. Richard Russell this past week. Richard Russell is a newsletter writer that's been around a long time. I think he's been publishing his Dow Theory letter for probably over 40 years. I believe Mr. Russell is probably about 90 years old. A very, very sharp guy. He said that we should raise the price of gold overnight to $10,000 an ounce and cause massive inflation in order to pay our debts. You'll want to stay tuned for that. You'll want to hear what he's saying. Also, a Citibank analyst is bullish on gold and will also analyze the most recent employment report. Certainly not the best report. We'll break it down. There is one bright spot. We'll be breaking that down in the last segment of today's show. Participation rate in the job market, though, is down to 63.5%. Certainly that's not great news. Also in Business Insider this past week, some very interesting charts. China's trade balance is falling. Chinese industrial profits have just turned negative. That's likely a sign of weaker demand and higher wages in China. India's industrial production also gone negative, as well as Japanese exports, the Philly Fed Manufacturing Survey, and South Korean exports. When you examine the data that was published in this Business Insider article on September the 9th, 2012, I believe one can only conclude that the world is already in a recession. And if the world is already in a recession, we need to talk about what strategies make sense for you and your portfolio. We outlined some of these strategies in our 2012 guide, Surviving a Market Crash. You'll want to go to investingapproach.com to request your copy if you've not already done so. All you have to do is enter your name, the address to which you'd like this kit sent, and we'll be very glad to send you one absolutely free of charge and without obligation. The website, again, is investingapproach.com. Also, one discovery group coming up this week, Tuesday. And that'll be the 18th. It'll be held at Boulder Creek Golf Club up in Belmont. If you'd like more information on that, you can go to personallegacyseminars.com. That is personallegacyseminars.com. I am pleased to have back with me on the Everything Financial Radio Show today the president of DownsizeDC.org, Mr. Jim Babka. Jim has been a guest on the program. I think, Jim, this is your third, maybe even fourth appearance on the show, so very glad to have you back with us today.
I'm glad to be here.
Jim, I'm looking at your website, and the most recent article that's entered is something called Real ID, Death by Defunding, and I think there's a lot of listeners out there that are not aware of this whole national ID card proposal. Can you fill us in?
Well, if they've had the chance to stand in the extra long lines at the Bureau of Motor Vehicles and upon arriving at the counter found out that they needed some additional bit of ID, like a utility bill or something like that, they've had a first-hand experience with this. The Real ID Act was passed surreptitiously in 2005. It couldn't pass the Senate despite repeated attempts to get it through, and the Conference Committee, which is where the House and the Senate get together to work out differences between a bill, were working on a bill for troop appropriation. They were trying to make sure they funded the troops in Iraq at the time, and they decided to attach a rider onto the bill to sneak through the Real ID Act. Since then, 25 states, half the states in the country, have not implemented Real ID or have only implemented small portions of it. Several passed resolutions saying that they would never do it. Well, one even passed a law saying that they would not do it. So there's some pretty dramatic statements on record. This is a very unusual thing, and as a result, years have gone by without this program being fully implemented, and it's gradually been dying a slow death, save for the fact that there are several people, hangers-on, who are collecting money from the federal government to provide contract services for the research and development of the tools that are necessary to implement this unfunded mandate on the states. And we want to finally cut that off as well. Half the states haven't implemented. Let's finish off the program. There's going to be a 6-month, probably this week, continuation of appropriations to keep the government open and operating past the elections. Early next year, they'll come back and work out the rest of their budget details. And we're proposing there should be an amendment in the package that zeroes out the funding for the Real ID Act.
Well, and Jim, when you start talking about this Real ID and an unfunded and it's an unfunded mandate to the states, which incidentally there's a lot of those. How does this play in and fit in with the some of the proposals made by the candidates, Mr. Romney in particular, about the whole electronic identification system?
Well, Mr. Romney definitely wants to help out these corporate welfare queens that want to bag and tag you. He wants to make it so that you need an identification just to get a job. You will be presumed guilty until you prove yourself innocent with the appropriate ID provided by the federal government, so that we can do this allegedly to fight off the plight of illegal immigration, because we know there's so many of them walking in and taking high-level corporate jobs from the rest of us. So this is part and parcel. This was a Republican proposal from start to finish, unfortunately. Because they, frankly, have very little respect for privacy and a fetish for security. They're very scared of their own shadow, I think, and so they don't care much about civil liberties. But these things can really affect you. The ability to travel, the ability to acquire employment, these things are basic, fundamental human rights. The idea that they could interfere with contracts between two willing individuals and tell them simply because they don't have the right government permission slip, they can't engage in commerce or so forth, can't feed their family, can't travel from point A to point B. This is a pretty egregious thing. This is a pretty serious thing. It's a pretty un-American thing, frankly. It's something that even 15 years ago in the America that I grew up in, we would have mocked and ridiculed places that would have said, "May I see your papers, please?" And here we are today with the Republican nominee in particular and his party advancing proposals that do precisely that.
Jim, I know this election cycle, I do a lot of speaking at different discovery groups, and a number of listeners write in and email in, and there seems to be a lot more discontent among the electorate this year. A lot of people have just thrown up their hands and given up on both of the major political parties. And you, last time you were on the show, started to talk about a principle that you were really, I just think, kind of introducing called deny consent. And that kind of plays into the same level of discontent that we see out there in the electorate. Can you fill the listeners in?
Well, deny consent for us is going to be based on another principle called the zero aggression principle, which is basically very much like the golden rule. Everybody knows what the golden rule is, that you're supposed to do to others, you would have them do unto you. Well, there's kind of a de minimis version of that where we just don't do to other people what we don't want done to us, and that's the zero aggression principle. Don't initiate force against other people. Don't bully or aggress on other people, steal their stuff, harm them, hurt them, kidnap them to get you to achieve your social goals. And certainly don't delegate it to a group of people called politicians. Don't let them have that same power. And every time that happens, it's not government that's occurring anymore. When naked aggression occurs, it's a crime. And we want to point out that crime, and we want to begin withdrawing consent from it at every level. And the fact of the matter is that every government, no matter how tyrannical it is, or even benevolent it is, only has power to if that power is granted to them by its subjects. If you choose not to be a member, for example, of a club or an organization or a church, if you can walk away at any time, but you can't seem to walk away from the state. And we want to make clear that you actually do have that ability, that even those tyrants need your consent in order to do what they do. The classic historical example of this is the Declaration of Independence. There's a list of 27 grievances in there, 27 things that they were upset about. But we remember it because it established a principle first, or actually a set of principles, about how governments must have the consent of the people that they govern, and that when governments no longer serve the interests of their people, that those governments can be altered or abolished. So the key goal for me is to begin to build people's awareness of all the various ways that this government fails to serve the needs of its people, fails to serve basic common sense decency. They don't even read their bills, Dennis. Why in the world should we tolerate people making laws that just won't even bother to read what they're imposing on us? And so we want to begin to build a movement of people who say, you know what, I simply don't consent to this form of government any longer.
Jim, we're coming up on a break here in about a minute. Let's close this segment by letting listeners know where they can learn more about your organization.
Well, right now there's two websites they can go to. There's downsizedc.org. There we give people an opportunity to communicate with Congress every day about things like the Read the Bills Act, and the Zero Aggression Project, which is a site that we're just starting to build now and we're hoping to launch in November.
All right. Well, we certainly appreciate you being with us. And when we come back, we are going to chat with Jim about a couple of key proposals put forth and I believe initiated by Downsize DC, the Read the Bills Act and the One Subject at a Time Act. Jim has been spending some time in Washington as well, so we'll get an update on those two bills when Everything Financial Radio on the Legacy Radio Network returns. Stay with us.